Getting on the property ladder is a massive aspiration for a huge part of the UK population, but there are, of course, barriers and hurdles that we need to overcome. One of those big barriers is the deposit. This is where a lot of people fall down. They save and they save and they save to get a deposit. And then by the time they've got enough deposit to buy the house that they wanted, the house that they wanted has gone up in price and they need more deposit and they can never catch it up. But what if I told you there was a way to get on the property market with a much smaller deposit? And what I'm talking about specifically are 5% deposit mortgages, 95% loan to value. In fact, but this is a bit of a side note maybe for another video, you can even get 100% mortgages. Years ago, you used to get them like they were giving out sweets, but nowadays you can also get, with some lenders and some specific criteria, 100% mortgages. So look into that separate to this video, especially student 100% mortgages is a thing. And also you look at something like, say, Barclays Springboard mortgages, where somebody stands as a guarantor on your deposit, so perhaps a family member, and they'll get their deposit back. They might put 10% in and get that back and get you on the ladder. But this video is specifically about putting 5% down. So let's say you've got £5,000 and you want to buy a £100,000 property. And yes, believe it or not, Southerners, you can buy £100,000 properties, just not necessarily in London. So if you go out and about, you can go all around the UK, find yourself a property for £100,000, and provided it's a home buyer's property, and I'm going to go through all the other criteria as well, you can then pop your money down and get yourself that property. Now, why would you want to do this? Number one, you're going to save on money when you buy this property because you're not going to have any stamp duty tax. You're going to get stamp duty relief as a first-time buyer. Number two, it's in your personal name as and when you sell it. Could be some capital gains tax relief depending on what you do with the property later, but we'll talk about what you do with it later because you might decide to convert that into an investment property. But let's start at the beginning. So we're going to buy the property. Factor in the fact that you will potentially need to cover some legal fees for your solicitors, and you will potentially need to cover a valuation. Some lenders will have that included. Most mainstream lenders will offer a 95% mortgage. So that's your Barclays, NatWest, Nationwide. All of those banks will offer you that sort of product. Now you can go, provided you've got the affordability, and that means provided you've got the income to purchase that property and support that mortgage, you can go and get that, usually on a repayment mortgage, which means that you're paying off the balance of the loan over time. But the question is, what do you do next? So the prerequisite for these mortgages is generally that you have to live within the property. But with a lot of these mortgages, after you've lived within them for a certain amount of time, some lenders 6 months, some lenders 12 months, you can often change your mind and request a consent to let, or your circumstances may change rather than your mind changing per se, but you could request a consent to let from your lender, who will then ordinarily, unless there's some specific reason why they shouldn't, grant you a consent to let, which means you can move out of the property and then rent it out, thereby turning it into an investment property. So it's a great way to get an investment property on the ladder with a small deposit and overcome that hurdle of not being able to save a big enough deposit in the first point. Now, what other exits are there here? So number one, you could of course live in the house and stay in it and live there happily ever after, but I'm seeing this as a potential stepping stone for a lot of you hungry property investors. Number two, you might decide to apply later down the line for some sort of consent to let, provided your lender grants that permission, and then use it as a rental property. Keep in mind it's in your personal name, so you will be subject to Section 24 and all of that good stuff. Number three, and this is a cute little option, so you're welcome in advance. Number three, well, if that property needs a little bit of work, and let's say you fund that work, and one way to fund that work could be, remember, do your due diligence, get support, make sure you know what you're doing. Could be to, for example, get a personal loan that covers works on your home, renovations and developments on your personal home, which is one of the reasons that a lender will give you a personal loan. You could carry out some works to that property and then potentially refinance out of the property on a buy-to-let mortgage, provided that you've given yourself 25% equity. Let me put this into numbers so that it makes sense to you. Let's say, for example, I've got a friend called Sonne, and Sonne decides to go and put 5% down on a £180,000 house. So that's £9,000 that he has to put as his deposit. And then he goes and gets a £25,000 loan. He carries out some work to the property, and now he's spent 25 grand on the property, but it's worth £260,000 because he's done a great job of renovation, because he's a smart guy. Now, what happens then is he could potentially go to the bank to refinance using that increased equity and refinance out of his original mortgage. Now, you need to check there's no early repayment charges if you're trying to do this too quickly. Some lenders will let you out in less than 2 years. Some lenders are going to bind you in for that first 2 years. But let's say you then get a 75% loan to value mortgage on a 260k property. Stick with me, people. That means you're going to have around £195,000 on a mortgage. You'll need to leave £55,000 in, which means you'd repay your original mortgage, and you should be able to thereby cover that based on the fact that your original mortgage on that £180,000 property was £171,000. So that means you could potentially refinance out of the property, have 25% equity in it, and go on to buy another house and potentially rinse and repeat and do the same darn thing again. Don't forget, you of course will need to pay back the loan at some point, and so on and so forth. But just to give you an idea of how we can get on the ladder without using much, apart from a lot of leverage. Remember, the bigger the lever, the stronger the force. So a little bit of a deposit, a lot of leverage, and we could potentially be getting ourselves up and running on the ladder. So that's just a bit of an idea of how you can get going. There's lots of different ways you can branch off with it. Make sure you understand the lending requirements. Make sure you always read your paperwork. Make sure you're not trying to exit anything early. You're not breaching any mortgage conditions, and you understand the criteria and you are sticking to them. Make sure you understand the tax implications of potentially buying a property in your personal name and then renting it out. But this could be an incredible way to get a start on the property ladder. And of course, let me know any other things that you think would be useful in this scenario in the comments. And as always, you're welcome. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and click the bell icon. You're welcome.